One more dispossessed child, do you suppose? Another refugee? Very much otherwise. This child's opportunities are those her parents could never have known or imagined. The inheritor of a society where housing is free, and schooling is free, and medicine, and electricity and water, and no income tax. Which country? This is the classical desert. Endless vistas of emptiness. A desolation of sand, salt flats, and sun. 25,000 square miles of cruel and comfortless wasteland. Such is the sheikhdom of Abu Dhabi, stretching its bleak way from the Arabian empty quarter to the Gulf, abandoned, it would seem, by all the gifts of nature. Only the hardy Bedouin, who take special pride in being master of the desert, could settle here and survive. Of such mettle are the Bani Yas tribes from the Liwa oasis. More than 2 centuries ago, in 1761, their ancestors discovered a well on Abu Dhabi Island. And there they built the first huts of what was to become the country's capital. And indeed, until very recent times, the inhabitants of Abu Dhabi town were still living in homes of baked mud or brittle palm leaves. One building alone stood above and apart in its aloof and dilapidated dignity. The palace of the ruler. Sheikh Shakbut bin Sultan, the former ruler of Abu Dhabi, had granted concessions to various oil companies for exploration in his domain, but little had come of it. Before the discovery of oil, Abu Dhabi had existed tenuously on pearl fishing. But with the 30s came the World Depression, and the Japanese had by then learned to cultivate pearls by the million. The Second World War was one more blow. The oil companies stopped their searching. Abu Dhabi, isolated on the rim of the desert no one wanted, sank into poverty and isolation. Economic depression has not the same meaning for the Bedouin, who have always come to terms with hardship. The people of Abu Dhabi were assured at least of subsistence. They could make do. The coastal people caught the fish. The dwellers in the oases harvested the dates and the vegetables. And between the oases and the towns moved the nomads with their flocks and herds, selling meat and milk. Their cash income might amount only to a few pounds a year, but they lived. Nevertheless, such a living was tough and rigorous and exacting. The land is virtually waterless, and life meant an almost permanent state of movement, mile after mile, from one meager grazing ground to the next. To the Bedou of the desert, with his ancestral memories of tribal traditions, an approaching stranger must always be identified and proved to be a friend. Only then will be exchanged the greetings, the salutations, and the passing on of news. The Bedouin are a tough and durable people. It is their pride that they can survive where few others could. Their manner of life and even their costume have barely changed since the days of Abraham. Their folklore and their poetry are not of tranquil things, but of wars and gallantry, of loyalty, courage, and conquests. Water is scarce in the desert. Out of necessity, they will cover hundreds of miles each year in search of grazing and water. After the Second World War, the oil prospectors came back to the Gulf. Fields for development had already been established in Kuwait and neighboring Qatar. But the Gulf Emirates, with Abu Dhabi the largest, were still a great speculation. In 1949, after long surveys and tests, an oil company began to drill the desert 80 miles from Abu Dhabi town. That same year, the ruler formally declared sovereignty over Abu Dhabi's offshore areas. Then, in 1953, after 2 years of negotiations, he granted a concession to explore 12,000 square miles of seabed off the coast of Abu Dhabi. The experts probed the seabed, examining its composition. And then, after seismic and gravimetric surveys, the drillers chose their spot. They set up their base on a nearby island called Das. The island was transformed into the headquarters for the underwater search. Experts from Europe and many other parts of the world started to descend on the desert island, which till then had only been inhabited by wild birds.